Alright, hey everyone, this is going to be more of a discussion video, and it's got two purposes to it. One is just to kind of talk and contemplate on the Leadwerks engine, which is something that I've been kind of exploring in the last few days, and two is kind of like a presentation, enticement, informational thing about the engine and what I know about it so far, to one of the users on the Game Maker Studio forum who expressed interest in this engine because they overheard me talking about it. So shout out to Mr. Waddleman, I think. This is the user. Okay, so Leadwerks Engine. I'm always on the lookout for a new engine to work in, a new tool that I can kind of learn and master and just have as an option to make a game in, so that I'm not constrained to one particular tool. There's nothing wrong about, exploring 3D game making in Game Maker Studio and being like, one tool for everything. But at the same time, I feel like should something come up, and that's like an extreme, should Game Maker fail, or should I get a project that requires like quick setup? To be honest, Game Maker would not be my first choice for a 3D game. Up until this point, I thought that I honestly thought that Unreal Engine would be my setup, would be my like go-to engine for 3D game making. But it's actually been kind of challenging to grasp the whole C++ process, because this is what I'm looking at from an engine, not to use the drag and drop and the easy designer solution and make games without programming knowledge, all that bullcrap. I'm actually looking at programming using proper code, which is why with Game Maker Studio I don't use drag and drop, I use GML. The second engine that I've been working with is App GameKit, and it's a great engine. It's also a multi-platform engine. It's code once deployed to whatever, and it runs on BASIC and C++. It also runs on Python, and I think they've gotten like another language in their arsenal. They're kind of expanding the API to different languages, so it's kind of nice. Now, and then I came across this engine a little while back. The engine, to be honest, I was kind of weary of it. The first time around, which was maybe like half a year, almost a year ago, I picked up Leadwerks off of Steam sale for $20, but then I discovered that it was a Lua only engine, or so I thought, because I'm an idiot. I don't actually read the description. I just read the first few like bullet points, and it said Lua programming language. I'm like, never mind, let me just refund this. So I was going through it recently, and I was kind of reading through it, and I read that this actually does support C++. It's just that it does this thing that a lot of engines do. It gives you the base engine right here for $110 Canadian, and then it does this like professional edition for another 110. Another one for 110 for the professional edition. So basically, you get the access to the full C++ API from the professional edition of the engine. And to me, I was like, oh, C++, interesting. I mean, I had no intentions in getting the Lua, getting into another programming language when I haven't, mastered the ones that I've started. But I already knew C++ from App GameKit, so I figured, I can look this up. So from that point on, the setup, to be honest, was probably one of the easiest setups that I have had when I was getting introduced to an engine. This is one of the easiest introductions and learning curves that I've had ever. So the one thing that really got me interested in this engine after I found out that it was C++ is the fact that unlike GameMaker Studio and App Game Kit, this behaved more along the lines of Unreal Engine running in C++. And what I mean by that is that you can design your entire level in the provided level editor. And you can program all the logic, like doors, enemies, particles, all that stuff. You can program anything else in C++, and you can still program it in the engine. If you want to like program a door to go up and down, it's as simple as just flipping a switch. You can program it in here. Granted, using Lua, but it's a door, right? If you need stuff that more complex, like AI, enemies, NPCs, user interface, all that stuff can be programmed in C++. So here, I've set up a tiny little thing that I've been walking around and playing around, and let's go ahead and maybe I can open up Project Manager, save this, and I will I'll open up this folder, and if I go, so this automatically gets generated when you create a new folder or a new project. So if I go to Projects and Windows, and there's my C++ base, I can open up Visual Studio, and I'll load this back up. So while Visual Studio is loading up in the background, I can go ahead and like screw around in here, place some white boxing stuff, creating levels out of boxes so that later on you can expand on it. There it is. You can turn the white boxes or these boxes into actual geometry and import it. So it's very reminiscent of Unreal Engine. In Unreal Engine, you basically use these primitive shapes to kind of set up your level and test stuff out. And you can put in your lights. Let's do a spotlight. Place it here. Let's see, almost still loading up. Oh, created another box. Let's create that spotlight. How do I create a spot? Here we go. Granted, I am no professional, and I have yet to actually figure out how to create stuff. Hey, here we go. Beautiful. That just created a light for me. So what did I do here? Press position and enter. Oh, beautiful. Well, that was easy. So yeah, as you can see, this is very reminiscent of Unreal Engine. You just place your stuff, your items in the level, and just work around like this. This is my directional light. And what really got me interested is that you can design this basically provides you with a level editor. You can design your entire level in here, and it handles all the basic rudimentary stuff that every single engine usually has to offer. Right? It provides you with your lighting pipeline, your shaders pipeline. So let's see, I have my, player. If I go to assets, here's the gun model I've been working on. Now the hands are not textured properly, and this was kind of I think this is my 4th attempt at making some sort of a usable first-person hand animation, and I'm currently remaking it's just iteration after iteration, making new one and new one. I modeled the gun model and the hands model. This is my next pair of hands that I've been working with. So this one actually turned out a lot better than the previous one, and I'm kind of learning how to do rigs and animations and whatnot. But anyways, so you know, you have your shaders, as you can see, and this is an interesting. It also works with materials just like Unreal Engine does. So you can pick your, for example, you can pick your shader here, right? And it gives you a couple of pre-made shaders to work with. Diffuse, normal, specular, right? There's one with alpha mask and one with emissions, right? Like an emissive map. So this is like diffuse, normal, specular, emissions. These are like the 4 things that any engine should provide, and GameMaker Studio does not provide these things out of the box. And shadows as a separate thing. So, you know, this is the texture for this gun model I did in Substance Painter. So, I mean, I actually have a pretty well set up, geared up studio, to be honest. So this is kind of interesting. So yeah, I mean, it provides you with pretty much the same tool set as Unreal Engine. But one thing I find in Unreal Engine is that the C++ setup in Unreal is super convoluted, and it has good reasons too. It provides you with an enormously well polished environment, but the problem is that in order to wield that environment, you have to have a team, or you have to be one of those like Asian developer heroes making an entire MMO game all by themselves. Or what's that news article I saw? People were reporting that this one-man production team was working on like a near automata-like game. It kind of looked like it. So yeah, I mean, here I am in this editor, which by the way kind of looks like the Valve's hammer, but you know, not pointing fingers. And you know, I'll save this and I'll go to Visual Studio, and I mean, this right here is all I had to do to set it up, and half of the stuff was already here when I created the thing. The app loop and the app start, right? This is your create event, like room create event or application create event, and application loop. And you know, I can press F5, and this sucker is gonna start compiling, and it blows my mind how simple it is to actually set up a blank level. And it blows my mind just how straightforward it is to actually get anything to like be runnable, right? How to prepare that environment. So here I am. This was kind of like an initial setup. I have like this physics object that's kind of flops on my head, and that makes my frame rate drop. But plus I'm also recording while I'm doing this, so you're gonna have to excuse the frame rate, because I can't record and play stuff and work on stuff in here right away. So you know, here's that physics ball, and here's all the lighting stuff. Like, to me, this is amazing, right? The fact that I got here after very little setup, right? And this is kind of like the first person experiment that I'm trying to do here. So this is this is like the output terminal. You can basically print variables here like you do with GameMaker with the show debug message. You can, you know, plop out variables here so you can debug stuff. But yeah, I mean, take a look at this. Floats. So these are my variables for mouse X and mouse Y, so I can move the camera around. Excuse me. Camera X, camera Y, jump speed, jump to true false, player XYZ. I mean, these are things you'd have in GameMaker Studio either way. And then I have these objects, which are like if you have a player class, player object, there's a pivot, right? And a model, right? So you have to create a variable that is, it's not the type of boolean, the type of float, or type of integer. It has to be a variable type model so that you can, you know, save IDs for models into it. This box is actually the sphere that was rolling with the physics engine. Player movement, this is just a vector 3, but I don't think I'm actually using this in, yeah, well, I'm only using it here. And I'm only using individual values here anyway, so I don't even have to use the vector 3. I can just use player movement X, player movement Y, and player movement Z. Hands revolver, this is the object, a variable that of class model, so that I could hold the model of the first person revolver and hands. And here's the pivot, which is like an offset parent. So what this basically does is if you want to offset the center of an object, you can put it in the pivot and rotate it and position it inside of the pivot. Instead of rotating the box, you rotate the pivot, right? And this is kind of the way I've set up the first person camera in here. First person camera and the gun model. Right? So the pivot, basically, in the pivot, I said that let's see, create the camera, you know, then we save the camera ID into the variable and set camera, set rotation, camera, set position, right? And then I say create the player object, right, which just a pivot, and then I say that over down here we need to say that we need to basically create our model, hands revolver, and what I'm doing is that this hands revolver will be the child, so I will set this pivot as the parent of the hands revolver. So now if I move the pivot, the hands move as well. And I also do the same thing with the camera, right? So the camera and the hand revolver. So what happens now is that I can, inside of the pivot, I can position the camera in the middle, but I can position the hand for the first person shooter hands slightly to the right. So when I move the pivot, the camera and the hands move together, right? And they don't move along their axis, they move along the pivot's axis, so that the actual so that the hand would always stay with the angle in the same place in the camera, right? So I mean, you can already see this stuff is like super straightforward, right? It's hands revolver, and this is the, basically we're setting the hands revolver parent and the hands revolver rotation and position, right? This is how we basically set it with C++. This was the sphere. Originally I wanted to do like a dummy object, which is how I would usually do it with GameMaker Studio, but you know, there's actually already a player class that's in here, and it's not even a player class, it's just the character class. It can be an enemy, it can be a player, it can be, you know, anything that has to run around and jump, and that class is actually the let's see, was it the pivot class or something else? Player, I think it was the player box. I think that's what it was. Or maybe not. The player box is the sphere. So the player, let's see, it would be this. Okay, yeah, so it basically is a pivot. Oh yeah, and this is another thing. So basically I created the pivot and that became a player object. So this is what I attach my camera and my first person character to. Whoops. And here's the interesting thing. The fact that this engine handles a lot of the background stuff for you, like physics, like lighting, right? All of that background stuff you usually have to set up and code yourself in GameMaker Studio from scratch. It handles for you in the engine. So what we have here is when we set the physics mode to a character physics, this automatically turns this object, this pivot, right? It turns it into a character class object. Technically, it remains a pivot class, but what it basically integrates this object to be a character object in the engine. And there's a line over here that says set input. So player object set input, and this is the strafe speed. This is movement speed. This is let's see. This is the camera angle. The strafe speed, movement speed, and jump speed, and you have a couple more parameters. And this is as easy as it is to set up a first-person or third-person player, right? You can even set this up. I'm pretty sure you can even set this up with whatchamacallit. You can set this up with like vehicles, and there is a vehicle example in here as well you can use. So this, and the fact that there's like a physics engine already involved in it, you can use like physics force in order to move your characters around if you're making like some sort of a car game, like car battle game that is supposed to involve physics, right? And destructible objects and whatnot. So as you can see, this stuff is like fairly straightforward. It's almost ridiculous. Like here's the update script. This is just kind of sitting here to update each frame. This is pretty standard for a C++ game running on an engine like this, right? So in the creation, I'm creating all my objects, all my spheres, boxes, players, importing all my 3D models, and then over here I'm doing std string map, and I'm loading up a map, and I'm storing it here, and then I say map load, and this basically loads up the map that I made in Leadwerks. If I take a look at the let's see, if I take a look at the maps, here's the start map.map, which is a Leadwerks extension, and here's start map.map, right? So it much like GameMaker Studio, it also has its own like proprietary language, because nothing in GameMaker Studio is actually a JPEG or a PNG. It's actually the yo-yo file format, like yo-yo sprite or yo-yo object, that contains the engine data, right? And then it just pulls up the sprite. It just pulls up the data, like a sound or sprite or code, from the side, right? So just like with GameMaker Studio, let's see, here we go, and engine, like if we go to sprites, as you can see, this is the Yo-Yo Games GameMaker Studio, its own proprietary file that contains the sprite data, right? It's never just the PNG or JPEG file. It's never that simple. Unless you're making an engine for yourself, which means that instead of a file, you have to write your own code that is located in the core program, which kind of sucks, but you know, you choose your tools, so you have to work with their grooves. Yeah, so we'll load up a map. This is how easy it is. There's also a function to unload the map, and then you load another one if you have a loading stage, right? Or even you can do like a dynamically loading map, like Dead Space, right? And here's the loop. You know, the camera movement's pretty straightforward. The camera code is exactly the same as anywhere. So you have the, you know, you take the position of the mouse in the window. So you take window, get mouse position. And by the way, this window was created right over here, right? The size of the window, title, context is basically the content that is to be displayed inside of the window. So, and then, you know, we create a world. However, I am not even sure if I even need this world, to be honest. I don't, we have the world render, so I guess maybe the world needs to be created, and then you load the map into the world. But who the fuck knows, right? I've just started with this engine. And, you know, I take my keyboard inputs, my jumping is a little finicky. I still have to kind of detect whether I'm touching the ground before I set the jump to false, so I could jump again. Because right now I can like jump indefinitely, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of like Flappy Bird right now. Some weird three-dimensional Unreal Engine-ish Flappy Bird. It's kind of weird. Let's see. And we've got, I'm just waiting for this thing to like load up. I'm rotating the player rotation, and this is some debugging stuff. So realistically, I mean, if you get rid of all the spaces and only account for the code that I wrote, there's maybe like 30 lines of code total. That brings up the application to some sort of a playable state, right? Not just creating an empty room and creating a camera that orbits around some 3D object. I'm talking about like being able to walk around, run around, you know. Don't mind the fact that, you know, my head can swivel 360 degrees right now. I have yet to put in some limitations there. But yeah, I mean, this right here is basically 30 lines of code. And once again, the choppiness is just because I'm capturing this while I'm recording. I can't do that. I'm running on a potato, man. So yeah, it's like, hey, Flappy Bird, let's get out of here. Right? And look at that, just lighting already in place. Normal maps already, normal maps and specular maps already in place. This is just awesome. It's great. It does everything I need an engine to do. It handles all of the boring stuff for me. It provides me with the tool set to create levels, and yeah, it gives me the freedom to concentrate on the actual game development, and not having to like circle around figuring out why are physics not working, right? How to get the 3D model to be imported into a buffer and then render that buffer, and you know, how to set up a first person like matrix so you can set up your 3D world. And you know, you pick your tools. I like this. I'm gonna continue exploring it, and if anything, I might make even a tutorial or a course while I'm exploring, and you know, put it up on the asset base. I think it would be an interesting thing to look at. I am really liking this, to be honest. I was really impressed at just how easy it was to get into the whole series. And you can see, you know, this is the physics stuff. God, I love it. Okay, so anyways, you guys see what I'm doing here. Super easy stuff. I highly recommend it. There's still a day and like day and a half, day and a quarter left before the sale ends. And even if it does end, do look out for other sales later on. I'm hoping that this engine will continue being in development. This engine has started in 2008, and the forum has 18,000 registered members. So, you know, you can judge yourself, or you can judge it by that. I mean, I've seen forum posts that where people ask, oh, have there been any like major games made in this engine? And there's a lot of very fascinating tech demos, but people seem like, oh man, it's just a tech demo, right? They feel like if it's only a tech demo and there's no actual games made, then it's not worth their time. At some point, it's logical, but to be honest, Unreal Engine has fantastic tech demos, and Unreal Engine has fantastic games that have been made on it. But me as a game developer, I'm gonna be using maybe 20% of everything that Unreal Engine has to offer and can offer. I am never going to use up all of those amazing tech demo tool, or all those amazing tools that were used in tech demos for these fantastic results, right? It's not a single man thing. engines like these ones that make everything pretty straightforward and still offer like a competent language coding environment, I'd have to say like I'm really liking this. AppGameKit was up until now my go-to engine for 3D stuff, and I still might actually use it just because it is kind of interesting. But this is a great middle point between a code-only language like AppGameKit, which is what AppGameKit is. It does not provide any sort of level editing tools. You have to make your own level editor, or scout out, the forums if someone has already made one and made one publicly available. But this is a great middle point between Unreal Engine, which does offer a level editor and the C++ pipeline, but C++ pipeline is super convoluted. It's packed with dependencies, and it's packed with code that depends on a lot of different things. To some, it might be a good thing. I mean, Felix, aka GM Wolf, doesn't mind it. He finds it super interesting. Whenever I tried to get into it, I would get kind of... maybe it's just like, I just need to give it a go a couple more times. But this seems interesting. This seems like an interesting solution. This seems like a great middle point between Unreal Engine and a code-only engine like AppGameKit, right? And even with GameMaker Studio is technically a code-only language when you look at 3D stuff. You can use the 2D level editor creatively, but it definitely wasn't designed for making 3D games. So yeah, I'm gonna continue exploring it. And if you guys want to explore it, you can join. If you want to explore it with me, you can pick it up off Humble Bundle as of this video. And you can join me on my Discord channel, the Concept Hub, the link to which is down below in the description. And we can talk about it there freely. Because, you guys are, for the most part, you guys are GameMaker Studio family, so can't really discuss it on the GameMaker Studio forum. Anyways, this is it. I think I've discussed everything. And I'll see you guys in the next video.